Good day everyone, so hope you're all doing really well, and for those of you that wanted Skirk that you did get her, as you'll see here in the background, this is my special ritual or summoning spot for Skirk. It's in the Narwhal boss domain out of bounds, and there is a kind of a little bit of a secret way to trigger this effect, but those of you that know my channel, you know we do these kinds of goofy things. But regardless, so let's get to the video title. Yes, Skirk is amazing, and I don't mean that sarcastically, I mean that genuinely. I do think she's incredibly fun, she looks really gorgeous, and she's the type of character that I like. I mean, this is typical, Kokomi clan type of style, and yet if I had to compare Skirk to someone like Mavuika, I would argue that if you had to make a choice, whether it's because of limited playtime or whether you don't really want to spend on the game or whatever, but if you had to make the choice between going the premium Mavuika route, in other words, Mavuika with her supports, or the premium Skirk route with her supports, that the Mavuika route is arguably going to be better. And I'm saying this because Mavuika's rerun is also going to be coming up soon. So what we'll do today is just discuss then on a high level the Mavuika versus kind of Skirk premium support option. And by the way, the background footage here is just me goofing around, so please don't take it too seriously. But yes, so when it comes to the premium options, my personal assessment is that if I got Mavuika and Shilonen and Citlali, then Shilonen and Citlali are both much more flexible than Escoffier and Shenhe. That is my assessment as supports. I don't really count Farina here because Farina is kind of like an omni support. You can use her in both teams, so we're going to discount Farina for now. But that really, for me, is just like one of the strongest arguments as to why I would rather go the Mavuika route. And also the other thing is that when it comes to a raw damage comparison, the Mavuika premium teams just do more, regardless of whether you're at C0 or 1, where I currently am at for both Skirk and Mavuika in the background footage, or whether you are at C6 doing like whale maxing or whatever. And in all cases, the theory crafting and all the numbers have shown that in a lot of circumstances, your Mavuika teams will outdamage your Skirk teams. You are quicker off to get your burst onto the field to trigger these nuke reactions, whereas the Skirk teams definitely have a bit of like longer animations and wind-up times. So that is definitely a bit of a problem. And I think one of the reasons is that in the Skirk team, Farina's elemental burst animation does take a bit of time as well. So that is a bit of a small factor, but it does like add up over time. I think someone did a comparison at C6 where for every million damage that you can dish out with Skirk, a premium Mavuika team is going to do 1.6 million in certain scenarios, which is just really crazy. It just shows you how powerful Mavuika is, and also if you are going to go the vertical investment route, it really is just better than to go for Mavuika. However, if you are like me and you did pull for Skirk because you're not really going now for constellations anymore, but you're going to go for just like having as much characters, then yeah, I think Skirk is really fun. It really is, and she really is to me an end game type of unit that is just there to complement an already existing cast of characters that you have on your account. In other words, you've been playing for a long time, you're at the point where you are just like filling out any of the little niches that you're missing. You're an endgame player like me, and Skirk perfectly fits that bill. But certainly from a new player perspective, I would go the Mavuika route, and I would also go the Mavuika route because, and I know some people might not like me saying this, but the Spiral Abyss is not everything in Genshin. The overworld is actually quite a lot more. There's an incredible amount of primo gems and stories and world quests where if you had Mavuika, the traversal is just going to be way more fun, and beating up enemies is just so much cooler. Like, you're like diving from the hilltops and then smashing into enemies with your bike. There's just a certain fantasy that you get with Mavuika that you're not going to get with a character like Skirk, and it's not Skirk's fault whatsoever. I think if Skirk had released during, let's say, the Natlan, the Sumeru era, her traversal and effects would be really cool. But in terms of exploration, we've had a lot of cool and very compelling characters, and the Natlan characters have just power crept everyone in that regard. So especially for new players, I would encourage that. And also the other thing is, we are getting Notcry coming out very soon, and one of the things that I've learned from Genshin is that new regions are typically going to have characters that will power creep some of the older units. In other words, I think if you now had the opportunity to vertically invest and get, let's say, C1 Mavuika, or try and pull for a weapon on the rerun, that's probably going to serve you better in the long run than trying to wait for a Skirk rerun or an Escoffier or a Shenhe rerun, because the newer characters that are going to come out, I bet you, are just going to be much more stronger in terms of their damage potential. Now, given the fact that Mavuika is really insane, I do think that if you do pull for Mavuika, she's going to hold her value a bit longer, whereas for Skirk, it might be possible that by the time we get to Shesnaya that you would not even be wanting to play Skirk anymore, because that's just like, look, that's the nature of gacha companies. They're going to keep the power creep, they're going to just, yeah. So that is just the one cautionary piece of advice that I would give. But I mean, overall, look, it is fun to play Skirk if you're prepared to accept the, what do you call it, the trade-offs in terms of the damage. But there are also a couple of other varieties of teams that you can play Skirk in. For instance, you can play Skirk with a melt team that involves Skirk, Shenhe, and then let's say a Bennett and Xiangling. I've seen people do that. So if you're definitely willing to compromise on the damage, the team flexibility is certainly there. I mean, like I said, the Spiral Abyss is not everything, and if you've got good artifacts, you might as well just play around and mess around. And the same is true with Mavuika. You can use Mavuika in a Sukokumon-like setup and replace Xiangling. Oh, I just love saying replace Xiangling. But yeah, I mean, look, there's no hard and fast rules. Just go with whatever is fun. But I do think, from my personal perspective, just as an overall package, if you do go the Mavuika route, you're just gonna, I think for most people it would be much better. But hey, that's just my personal assessment. Alright guys, that's it from my side. Thanks for watching.